Hello, welcome, my name's Andy. Thanks for joining me for this flipped preaching video. We're going to have a look at another passage to help you prepare for Sunday's sermon. So our passage today is again from the book of John, the Gospel of John, John 15, verses 1 to 8 this time. Last week we looked at the passage where Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd." This week it's another "I am" saying. Remember, when you hear the words "I am", think back to the Old Testament, the liberation of the Israelites from slavery, and wisdom, Sophia, drawing all people of God together, drawing everybody together. Jesus said, "I am the vine." I am the vine. Now, there were only really 3 fruit plants that grew in the Middle East, and I've drawn here a vine and an olive, which are 2 of the 3, the third one being the fig. Now, vines were the most impressive of these fruit trees, the most splendid, and if you look at the picture, they're all twisty and turny and they grow in on themselves, and therefore in order to grow properly, in order to get the sunlight, they need to be pruned. They need a bit of maintenance. Olive trees don't, apparently. I'm no Middle Eastern gardener, but apparently olive trees don't, but vines do. And God is the gardener. Now, pruning, it's kind of a harsh term, but the purpose of pruning a plant, I'm no good at gardening at all. I know nothing about gardening, but I do understand the principle of pruning. Plants have got limited access to nutrients and water and sunlight, and if they grow too fast, too much for the resources which are available, then they produce poor quality fruit. So plants need to be pruned to produce the right amount of good quality fruit. Okay, now what does the fruit mean for us? You might think of it in terms of kind of mission fruit, as in people who don't know much about God finding out more about God and being drawn into the life of God in the church. That's all good. But I think in this passage, most often in the Bible, it talks about fruit as being morals. So in the book of Galatians, for instance, it lists what we refer to as the fruit of the Spirit. And they are love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness, and others too, which I can't fit on my sheet of paper. But they're all good things, really good things. So in order for this to happen, in order to bear this fruit, Jesus says it's very important that we remain in him. He's the vine, and we're just branches of the vine. So it's very important for the branches to remain attached to the main vine. Makes sense agriculturally, but in terms of our own lives, what exactly does that mean? What does it mean to remain in Christ? I want to use the idea of fractals, which I think might help to explain this. Now, a fractal is something that occurs in nature again and again. God seems to like fractals in creation. A fractal is something that repeats the same pattern on different scales. So for instance, a trunk of a tree might split into 2, then each of those branches will split into 2, and each of those branches will split into 2, getting smaller and smaller. The same pattern applies, and that's how trees work. It's how all sorts of things in nature works the same on a small scale and a big scale. So I think this principle of remaining in Christ, of bearing fruit and also being pruned, applies to us on a big scale, so that's a church community, and on a small scale, so individual, on the different aspects of your individual life. They can bear fruit and they can be pruned. So let's think first about the small scale, so an individual. So you and I, we've got to remain, we've got to be willing to be pruned, hard as that may be, and therefore will bear fruit. So to remain individually, for me to remain in Christ, what does that mean? Well, I think it means like to live with an openness of spirit, an openness of heart, to live prayerfully, enjoying the wander around, noticing, slowing down. That's what it means to me to remain in Christ. You may have your own way of doing it. We're all very different. But be intentional about spending time with God every day, all day, every day. Now there's pruning. We've got to be willing to let ourselves be pruned, to have things which are not helpful cut off. We can't keep it all. We can't keep it all. We can't take it all with us. So the Christian life is a life of being pruned, having stuff cut off, not literally, but be letting go of stuff, letting go. So if we're pruned, if we remain in Christ, we should hopefully grow fruit. It's God's work, and God is the good gardener. So we'll bear those qualities, those moral values, the love, the peace, the patience, the joy, the kindness. Now, as I've said, it also works, I think, on a big scale. So as a whole church congregation. Now you can think of that in a church congregation, a circuit, a district. If you're Methodist, you can think of it as a denomination. If you're not in church, you can think of it as your support network. Whoever it is, it works on a corporate level as well. And the same three things apply. There's the remaining. Let's just think of a church congregation. It's essential that church congregation remains with Jesus at the centre of all they do. And it's easy to drift off from that, but we need to always come back to putting Jesus and what Jesus taught and did and his example, his legacy at the heart of what we do. We need to be prepared to be pruned. We can't keep it all. Now what that means for a church will be different at different times, but just because we've done something, just because we've got something, just because we've got a pattern doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. We've got to be prepared to let things die, be cut off, so that the good bits can grow. And then we will produce fruit. We will be loving and joyful and kind and patient, and we'll display God's love. And then that will be good news for the people around us. Okay, I hope that has made sense of this passage. It's one of those passages that's quite straightforward, but again the consequences, the ramifications, the meaning for our lives is very, very deep. I hope that works. Thank you for listening. See you soon. Bye bye.